The year is 1066. England is a rich and powerful kingdom. It is a land of green fields, bustling towns, and ancient traditions. But a shadow hangs over this prosperous land. King Edward the Confessor is old and sick. He has ruled for more than 20 years. He is known for being pious and peaceful, but he has failed in one crucial duty for a king. He has no son. He has no direct heir to take his place on the throne. This simple fact is a ticking bomb, ready to explode and plunge the kingdom into chaos and war. The question of who will rule next is on everyone's lips, from the highest lord to the humblest farmer. King Edward's court is a place of whispers and plots. Powerful men watch the old king fade. They see an opportunity. They begin to sharpen their knives and gather their supporters. The stability of England, carefully built over many years, rests on the life of one dying man. Without a clear successor, the throne becomes a prize to be won. It is not a prize that will be won through peaceful means. It will be claimed by the strongest, the most ruthless, or the luckiest. The great lords of the land, the Anglo-Saxon earls, know that a storm is coming. They prepare for the struggle that is sure to follow the king's final breath. On the 5th of January, 1066, King Edward the Confessor finally dies. The news spreads like wildfire across the kingdom. The throne of England is now empty. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a record of the time, tells us that before he died, Edward pointed to his most powerful earl, Harold Godwinson. He supposedly named Harold as his successor. But was this true? Or was it a story created by Harold's supporters to strengthen his claim? In the dangerous world of medieval politics, the truth was often what you could make people believe. The king's death was not an end, but a beginning. It was the signal for the contest to begin. The Witan, a council of England's most important men, both secular and religious, gathered quickly. They had to make a decision. An empty throne was a danger to the entire kingdom. They needed a strong leader to defend England from its enemies. They chose the man who was already the most powerful in the land. They chose Harold Godwinson. He was crowned king at Westminster Abbey the very next day. It was a swift, decisive move, but crowning a king is one thing. Keeping the crown is another. Across the English Channel and over the North Sea, other powerful men believed the throne of England was rightfully theirs. They would not accept this decision. They would come to claim it with fire and steel. King Harold Godwinson was now on the throne. He was an Englishman born and bred. He was a seasoned warrior and a clever politician. He was the son of the powerful Earl Godwin of Wessex. For years, he had been the second most powerful man in the kingdom, after the king himself. He had the support of the English lords and the people. He knew the land and its customs. He believed he was the rightful king, chosen by Edward and acclaimed by the Witan. Harold was ready to defend his crown. He knew that challenges would come, and he prepared his armies for the inevitable invasions. He was a wolf guarding his own territory. But far away in Normandy, another man watched these events with fury. His name was William, the Duke of Normandy. He was a formidable and ruthless ruler. He had fought his whole life to secure his own duchy. William claimed that King Edward, who was his distant cousin, had promised him the throne years before. He also claimed that Harold Godwinson had once been shipwrecked in Normandy. William said Harold had sworn a sacred oath to support his claim to the English throne. To William, Harold was not a king, but a perjurer, a man who had broken a holy vow. He began to build a massive fleet and assemble a great army of knights to take what he believed was his. As if one challenger was not enough, a third claimant looked at England with greedy eyes. This was Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway. His name meant hard ruler, and he had earned it. He was a legendary Viking warrior. He had fought as a mercenary in Russia and served in the elite Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. He was famous for his immense height, his battle prowess, and his cruelty. His claim to the English throne was weaker, based on an old agreement between a previous king of Norway and a previous king of England. But Hardrada was an opportunist. He saw a kingdom in turmoil and smelled blood and gold. These three men were destined to clash. Harold Godwinson, the defender; William of Normandy, the claimant; Harold Hardrada, the invader. Each was a great leader in his own right. Each was ambitious and utterly convinced of his own right to rule England. The stage was set for a monumental conflict. The fate of England would be decided not in a council chamber, but on the battlefield. The year 1066 would become a year of 3 kings and 2 epic battles. It was a struggle that would see 2 of these men dead and 1 victorious, forever changing the course of English history. The lives of millions would be altered by their ambitions. The first to make his move was the Viking. In early September, Harold Hardrada's great fleet of around 300 longships appeared off the coast of northern England. It was a terrifying sight. With him was an unexpected ally, Tostig Godwinson, King Harold's own exiled brother. Tostig had been the Earl of Northumbria, but was driven out by his own people. Furious and seeking revenge, he had joined forces with the Norwegian king. Together, they sailed up the River Humber and then the Ouse, landing their vast army near the city of York. They were here to conquer the north of England first. King Harold was in the south of England. He had spent the entire summer waiting for William's invasion from Normandy. His army, the feared, was made up of farmers and landowners who had to return home to harvest their crops. Just as he was forced to disband much of his army, news of the Viking invasion reached him. The threat was immense. The northern earls, Edwin and Morcar, gathered their own forces and met the invaders at Fulford Gate, just outside York. The battle was a disaster for the English. The Vikings, led by the fearsome Hardrada, crushed the northern army. The city of York surrendered to the Norwegian king. When King Harold heard of the defeat at Fulford and the fall of York, he acted with breathtaking speed. He regathered his army, including his elite housecarls, and marched them north. They covered the roughly 185 miles from London to York in just 4 days. It was an incredible feat of endurance and leadership. The Vikings were caught completely by surprise. They were camped at a place called Stamford Bridge, relaxing in the warm sun. Many had even left their armor back at their ships, not expecting another battle so soon. They had no idea that Harold's army was upon them. On September 25th, 1066, Harold launched his surprise attack. The battle was savage and bloody. The Vikings, though caught unprepared, fought with incredible ferocity. According to legend, a single giant Norseman held the narrow bridge against the entire English army for a time, cutting down dozens of men before he was finally killed from below. But the English numbers and the element of surprise were too much. Harold Hardrada, fighting like a true Viking berserker in the front line, was struck in the throat by an arrow and killed. Tostig Godwinson was also slain. The Viking army was annihilated. It was a stunning and total victory for King Harold. But he had no time to celebrate. While Harold Godwinson was achieving his great victory in the north, the winds in the English Channel finally changed. For weeks, William of Normandy had been waiting impatiently on the French coast. His massive invasion fleet, filled with thousands of soldiers, horses, and supplies, was ready. But the wind had been blowing from the north, making it impossible to sail. This delay had been a blessing for Harold, allowing him to deal with the Vikings. But now, just 3 days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the wind turned. It started to blow from the south. This was the moment William had been waiting for. With the blessing of the Pope, who had sent him a sacred banner, William gave the order to set sail. His fleet crossed the Channel under the cover of darkness. On the morning of September 28, 1066, the Norman army landed unopposed at Pevensey Bay in Sussex. The south coast of England was completely undefended. King Harold and his army were over 250 miles away in the north, recovering from the brutal fight at Stamford Bridge. William's landing was a masterstroke of luck and timing. He had arrived on English soil without a single fight, his army fresh and ready for the campaign ahead. William immediately set about securing his position. He moved his army to the nearby town of Hastings. There, he built a prefabricated wooden castle which he had brought with him on his ships. This gave him a secure base from which to operate. From this stronghold, he sent his men out into the surrounding countryside. They burned villages and farms. They took food and supplies. This was not random destruction. It was a deliberate strategy. William was provoking Harold. He was daring the English king to come south and fight him. He was also damaging the lands that belonged to Harold's own family, making the challenge personal. The news of William's landing reached King Harold in York. It must have been a devastating blow. He had just won a glorious victory, but now he faced an even greater threat. His army was battered, bruised, and exhausted from the battle and the forced march. Yet Harold knew he could not wait. He had to face this new invader immediately. Once again, he gathered his weary soldiers and began another incredible forced march, this time back down the length of England. He was racing against time. He was marching towards his destiny, towards a small hill near Hastings, where the fate of his kingdom would be decided once and for all. After his grueling march south, King Harold arrived in London. He gathered what fresh troops he could. His brothers, Gurth and Leofwine, urged him to wait, to gather a larger army from all over England. They argued that he should let them lead the army, as he was the king and too valuable to risk. But Harold was determined to fight. He had defeated one invasion, and he would defeat this one too. He would not allow a foreign army to ravage his lands. On the evening of October 13th, his army arrived near Hastings. He chose his ground carefully, the top of a ridge known then as Senlac Hill. It was a strong defensive position. The next morning, on Saturday, October 14th, 1066, the two armies faced each other. The English army, under King Harold, formed up along the crest of the hill. They were almost all infantry. Their greatest strength was the shield wall. This was a tactic where the front rank of soldiers locked their shields together, creating an almost impenetrable barrier of wood and steel. Behind this wall stood the men with their spears, axes, and swords. At the heart of the line were Harold's elite housecarls, professional soldiers armed with fearsome long-handled battle axes. They were a formidable defensive force, a wall of English defiance. Below them, on the flatter ground, William of Normandy arranged his own army. His force was different from Harold's. It was a combined arms army, composed of three distinct parts. In the front were the archers, meant to shower the English with arrows and weaken their lines. Behind them was the infantry, soldiers who would engage the shield wall directly in close combat. But William's greatest weapon, his trump card, was his cavalry. He had brought hundreds of heavily armored knights on horseback. These were the tanks of medieval warfare. William believed his knights could smash through any defensive line. The battle began at around 9 in the morning. The Norman trumpets blared, and the attack started. William sent his archers forward first. They fired volley after volley of arrows up the slope towards the English line. But the arrows had little effect. Most of them either flew over the heads of the English or bounced harmlessly off the interlocked shields. Then, William ordered his infantry to advance up the hill. They charged, shouting and screaming, and crashed against the shield wall. The fighting was brutal and intense. The English held firm, pushing the Normans back with spears and swinging their deadly axes. The shield wall did not break. For hours, the battle raged. The Normans attacked again and again, but the English shield wall held strong. The slope of the hill gave the English a significant advantage, tiring the Norman soldiers and knights as they charged uphill. At one point, a rumor spread through the Norman ranks that Duke William had been killed. Panic began to set in, and his soldiers started to retreat. Seeing this, William rode among them, lifting his helmet to show his face. "Look at me. I live, and by God's grace, I shall conquer." His leadership rallied his men, and they turned back to the fight. But the English line remained unbroken. Seeing the Normans fall back, some of the English on the flanks of the shield wall made a fatal mistake. Flushed with success, they broke formation and charged down the hill after the retreating soldiers. This was exactly what William wanted. He ordered his knights to turn and attack these isolated groups of Englishmen. Away from the protection of the shield wall, the English were vulnerable. The Norman cavalry cut them to pieces. William saw that this tactic worked. He ordered his knights to pretend to retreat again, luring more of the English to break their line. This trick, known as the feigned retreat, was used several times to slowly wear down the English numbers. As the day wore on, both sides were exhausted. The English shield wall was still holding, but it was smaller now, thinned by hours of constant battle. Harold had lost both of his brothers, Gurth and Leofwine, who had fallen fighting near him. William changed his tactics one last time. He ordered his archers to fire their arrows high into the air so they would rain down on the men behind the shield wall. This proved to be a devastatingly effective move. The arrows fell almost vertically, striking the English soldiers on their heads and shoulders. It was during this barrage that legend says King Harold was struck. The Bayeux Tapestry, the famous embroidery that tells the story of the Conquest, depicts a figure with an arrow in his eye. It is widely believed this is King Harold. Whether by an arrow or cut down by Norman knights who broke through the weakening line, the English king fell. The death of their leader was the final blow for the English, their morale shattered. With night falling, the remaining housecarls fought to the death around their king's body, but the battle was lost. The shield wall broke completely, and the rest of the fyrd fled into the darkness. William of Normandy had won the Battle of Hastings. He was the conqueror. Winning the Battle of Hastings did not mean William had won England. The city of London shut its gates to him. English resistance continued, especially in the powerful and independent north. The remaining Anglo-Saxon lords gathered and proclaimed a new king, Edgar the Atheling, a young prince with a direct claim to the throne. William knew that a single victory was not enough. He needed to crush all opposition and impose his will on the entire country. He began a brutal campaign to subdue his new kingdom. He marched his army in a wide arc around London, burning and terrorizing the countryside until the terrified city finally surrendered. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, the same place Harold had been crowned less than a year before. But the ceremony itself showed the tension in the land. When the Norman bishop asked the crowd in French if they accepted William as their king, and the English bishop asked the same in English, the resulting shouts of acclamation were mistaken for a riot by the Norman guards outside. They panicked and set fire to nearby houses. The coronation ended in chaos and smoke. It was a clear sign that the conquest was far from over. William might wear the crown, but the English people did not yet accept him. The most ferocious resistance came from the north of England. In 1069, the northern earls rose in a major rebellion, aided by a fleet from the King of Denmark. They attacked and captured the city of York, slaughtering the Norman garrison. William's response was swift, brutal, and systematic. He marched his army north and unleashed a campaign of terror that became known as the Harrying of the North. He did not just fight the rebels, he destroyed the entire region. His soldiers burned villages, slaughtered livestock, and destroyed crops and farming tools. they created a man-made famine. The devastation was horrifying. Orderic Vitalis, a monk and chronicler who was himself half Norman, wrote that over 100,000 people died of starvation. The land between York and Durham became a barren, unpopulated wasteland for years. William's message was terrifyingly clear. This was the price of rebellion. He would tolerate no opposition to his rule. The harrying of the North effectively broke the spirit of English resistance. It was an act of extreme brutality that secured William's power, but it left a scar on the memory of the north of England that would last for centuries. The conqueror had shown his iron fist. With England now brutally subdued, William the Conqueror set about transforming the country. His primary goal was to secure his rule and reward the men who had fought for him. He did this by completely replacing the ruling class. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was systematically dispossessed of its lands and titles. Thousands of English earls and thanes lost everything. Their vast estates were confiscated by the crown and then handed out to William's loyal Norman, Breton, and Flemish barons. By the end of William's reign, only a tiny fraction of the land in England was still held by native Englishmen. A new French-speaking elite now governed the country. To control this new and often hostile kingdom, the Normans introduced a new system of governance: feudalism. Under this system, the king owned all the land. He granted large parcels of it to his barons in exchange for their loyalty and a promise to provide knights for his army. These barons, in turn, granted smaller pieces of their land to lesser lords or knights, who then owed them military service. At the bottom of this pyramid were the English peasants, who were tied to the land and worked for their new Norman lords. To enforce this system, the Normans built hundreds of castles across England. These were not just homes, they were symbols of power and military bases designed to dominate the local population. The conquest also triggered a profound change in the English language and culture. The new ruling class spoke Norman French. This became the language of the royal court, of law, of government, and of high culture. English, the language of the conquered people, was considered crude and peasant-like. For the next 300 years, England was a country with two languages. However, the languages did not remain separate. Over time, they began to merge. Thousands of French words for things like law, judge, jury, justice, food, beef, pork, poultry, and government, parliament, crown, state, were absorbed into English. This fusion created the rich, hybrid language we speak today. Another of William's great projects was the Domesday Book. In 1085, he ordered a massive survey of his entire kingdom. He sent his agents to every village and town to record who owned what land, how many people lived there, what resources it had, and how much tax it owed. The English people saw it as a terrifying judgment, like the Last Judgment or Doomsday. But for William, it was a magnificent tool of administration. It gave him an incredibly detailed picture of his new kingdom's wealth. The Domesday Book is a unique and priceless historical document. It is a snapshot of England just after the conquest, a testament to the new ruthlessly efficient Norman style of government. The Norman conquest was the single most important event in English history. It was not just a change of king, it was a complete social, political, and cultural revolution. The old Anglo-Saxon world, with its own distinct laws, language, and traditions, was shattered forever. In its place, a new Anglo-Norman society was born. The conquest violently wrenched England away from its Scandinavian connections and tied it firmly to the culture and politics of mainland Europe, particularly France. This new orientation would define England's foreign policy for the next 500 years, leading to centuries of rivalry and war with France. The immediate impact was brutal and oppressive for the native English. They became second-class citizens in their own country, ruled by a foreign aristocracy. This was the Norman yoke, a term used for centuries to describe the harshness of Norman rule. However, over time, the conquerors and the conquered began to merge. The Normans married into English families. They began to see themselves not as Normans living in England, but as Englishmen. The English language, though changed, survived and eventually re-emerged as the primary language of the nation, enriched by its massive injection of French vocabulary. The political landscape of England was also remade. William the Conqueror and his successors created one of the most powerful and centralized monarchies in Europe. The feudal system and the network of castles ensured the king's authority reached every corner of the realm. This strong central government, combined with Anglo-Saxon traditions of law and administration, laid the foundations for the modern English state. Future struggles between the king and his powerful barons, who demanded their rights be respected, would eventually lead to Magna Carta and the beginnings of Parliament. The seeds of English democracy were sown in the soil of the Norman conquest. Ultimately, the events of 1066 forged a new nation. The clash between Anglo-Saxon and Norman culture created a unique and dynamic synthesis. It shaped the country's language, its laws, its architecture, and its very identity. The epic tale of the Three Kings, the two invasions, and the fateful battle on a Sussex hill is more than just a story from the distant past. It is the dramatic and violent birth of modern England. The consequences of that single year are still visible today, woven into the fabric of the nation. The England that emerged from the fire of 1066 was a tougher, more complex, and more resilient country, forever marked by its conquerors.